Hello, this is David. Let's take a look at John Hull's chapter on swaps. There are several learning objectives in this chapter. I've divided them into two slides for our purposes here, and the reason is that I just wanted to separate what I would call the conceptual learning objectives listed here from the quantitative learning objectives. So the conceptual learning objectives, I think your key ideas here are: one, the notion that swaps allow us to transform an asset or a liability. I'll show you more on that. Two, you do want to understand the concept of comparative advantage and why a swap can allow a company with comparative advantage to take advantage. Three, credit exposure. The interest rate swap is probably the best example of an instrument that is exposed to both credit risk and market risk. And fourth, then at the end of the chapter, there are several different types of swaps listed. So the universe of swaps is very broad. There's lots of them. This chapter is primarily concerned with what I would call the plain vanilla interest rate swap. And it's even in there, you can see in the learning objective. So that's a fixed for floating interest rate swap. And then also we have the currency swap. So those are the two swaps that we're going to look at in terms of the valuation or pricing of them. For quantitative learning objectives, the key ideas here are understanding what a swap rate is, of course. There's a second idea here. You've noticed I put it in red, and that refers to something that you don't really see in the 9th edition of Hull, but we do see in the 10th edition. So this is a bit of a transition here, meaning I don't expect it to show up on the exam immediately, but let's be mindful of the fact that in the 10th edition, John Hull transitions away from the presumption of LIBOR as the risk-free rate for discounting to OIS, or overnight index swap, zero rate used as the risk-free discount rate. So this is that classic question of what do we use for the risk-free rate? It doesn't necessarily have a single best answer, but we will say that John Hull's answer, who is as good an authority as anybody, of course, on this, and he has also written separately papers about this aside from the text. John Hull's answer to that question is the OIS zero rate. Third, we do need to be somewhat proficient with interest rate swap valuation. And we can look at this in two ways, as two bonds or as a series of forward rate agreements. And then we do want to be able to do that with a currency swap as well, valuation. So those are the key ideas. Try to make that a little more efficient, because you can see here in this chapter, in terms of quantitative learning objectives, we do have quite a few quantitative verbs. Calculate, 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 calculate. Okay, so in terms of the mechanics of a plain vanilla interest rate swap, plain vanilla means a fixed rate payer and a floating rate payer. So they are exchanging. One company is agreeing to pay a predetermined fixed interest rate in exchange for receiving a variable rate. So that means the counterparty is going to pay a variable rate and receive a fixed rate. So the counterparty here in green who pays the fixed rate is called the swap payer. And this counterparty is going to profit from an increase in the interest rate. The counterparty here who pays the floating rate is called the swap receiver. I think it's easier to just refer to fixed rate payer and floating rate payer. We don't have to think about that too much. But probably do want to be familiar with the idea that this is the swap payer, this is the swap receiver. I know there is always a little bit of conversation about which is the long and the short, so I've included them on the slide, in the slide here. This is long, the swap, this is short, the swap. I don't recommend that kind of language, and also I think a question that just used that would not be a good question, because these are consistent with CFA. I think these are generally the correct answers, but you do see exceptions. You do see people using them in the other reversed. So I think we just stay away from that.